notification over there. Live.
I'm moving slow. Today's flow show is about moving slow.
Super slow.
Super slow.
Super slow.
Flow show.
Flow show. Whole new vibe. We're going slow, and we're here on the YouTubes. This is our first YouTube live. We're making some.
Just making crazy.
We're making crazy pivots all over the place, all
Yes.
out of the blue. So here we are checking out YouTube. Hello, the YouTubes.
Yes, and this is something we've been doing now at 12:12 on Thursdays.
12 Thursdays for a while now.
For a while, yes. So the YouTube pivot is just we're kind of checking out the vibe.
Just checking out the vibe over here. Sarah DiFelice here, and we have
Tim Glover.
And today's show, if you haven't already guessed, we're talking about moving slow.
Moving slow.
Why are we talking about moving slow in the flow?
Well, I think that part of my upbringing in life and also in as a business consultant was the whole objective was to get things done as quickly as you possibly could. And the person who was the fastest usually was associated with the person who would climb the hill the fastest and get to the top the fastest was the winner and therefore the leader. And sometimes in life, actually more often than not, to go fast, you got to go slow. So when we were talking earlier today, and we're both in a mode where we're moving a little bit slower this week in particular, because we've just got a lot of shifts taking place.
Shifts and to let go. And the regenerative.
Yes, we're in a regenerative
mode,
phase.
Which typically speaks to being slow.
And it also, the piece that actually prompted this was the idea, from my perspective, it doesn't suggest that it's actually a universal principle, but my understanding of mansplaining, and mansplaining being a typical situation where a man and a woman are actually talking. It could be a big group, but the man actually interjects with now I think what you're trying to say to the audience or to me is this. And it is my experience in those circumstances, observing myself and then observing others, that the pace of the discussion tends to escalate rather than move down into a more of a slow discussion about something. So it escalates in some manner like this, and we're talking, things are getting really exciting, and I can't wait for you to finish your sentence, so I'm going to talk over top of you and mansplain what it is that you said, or I'm not going to wait for a pass in this type of a setting. I'm just going to mansplain. And the thing that I've come to understand very strongly in the last couple of weeks is the need to be able to, in partnership, which is what we're now moving into, an economy where we're more interdependent, there needs to be more of a flow. And for those of us like myself who have learned and been rewarded for talking fast and getting to answers fast and then clarifying things fast and being really smart and shiny and fast, it's not always the best way to go. And it is, in fact, in a public speaking situation as well, it's a lot easier for people to connect with us, I'm learning, when we move the pace down a bit slower. And it is it's oriented to more of a body learner. A head learner tends to actually learn quite fast and then speak very fast. Whereas a body learner tends to actually learn from more of a body orientation, which is more of a flow and an ebb and a flow. So I thought, hey, let's have a little bit of a discussion about that. So that's my mansplaining, man's perspective on what it is that I'm trying to help these poor lost women, obviously, because without me and all the men who've actually, helped lead our great country and countries in the world from a top-down hierarchical power over, we know what's best for everybody else. So we're going to pass that on through our genes and through evolution. So the next generation of men have that same relationship with women. It is not really working out so well.
It's just, we just had an earlier riff about authenticity and connecting authentically. And obviously, if there isn't a space for a woman to feel like she's heard in her time, at the pace she wants to speak, her idea, her insight, her love, just doesn't have that space to grow. And this is really what we talk about, is what's needed. But I just wanted to acknowledge you for you being you and your ability to pivot and to change, like especially with in your generation where these neural pathways and ways of being are so like ingrained in just like our biology. And that's, we talk about unconscious bias all the time and just how we're programmed to be. And the part of the reason why we've created this network is to create a bridge to new ways of being, a bridge from that head to the heart, a bridge from top down to bottom up, and a space to communicate authentically and just to admit, because I've got my programming where I've not been able to be authentic or express myself authentically. And so I just want to acknowledge you.
Thank you for that. And I know I can also hear my wife Sharon, a business partner, who we've had more than a fair share of conversations around this concept. I'd love to say that I pivoted as really, really super quickly during that time frame, but I think that I probably, looking back, recognized that I was not necessarily as aligned with who I aspired to be. Then I'm much more in a situation now where I can actually accommodate that and then shift. And I see that being played out. In my generation in a huge way, the man-women relationship. And we have a point in history where yin is rising. So yin being more accommodating to what we interpret as more of a feminine flow than a masculine yang approach to life and business. And with that, there's just massive changes going on. We're moving from what was originally meant to be a global economy where we're all connected interdependently. That blew up in 2008. And under Trump administration in particular, we're actually moving back to something that's more we keep to our own, which is more of a dependent or codependent relationship between countries, especially as it relates to finance. And from my perspective, and we've talked about this, and I've talked about this with clients, it is now paving the way for a new way forward, which is more of this interdependent orientation. But we need to actually become better at listening and then allowing for this ebb and flow, and in the ebb and flow that we can use as a role model rather than looking at a top-down hierarchy of push, control, all those types of things that we've known for 4,000 to 7,000 years through patriarchal society.
Yeah. The moving slow really, like you said, allows the space to listen, because I believe that is the most important point of communication, is to really listen and to seek to understand others, and especially, as you say, with developing interdependent relationships. It's the ability for us to communicate ourselves authentically, and then to listen to others in a compassionate space, and to just understand like we're all in this together. And really the space at this point, because we are all coming from programs, and likely all of us are coming from an inauthentic way of being. This is why we're all having this real need to find a purpose. That purpose ultimately is you becoming fully aligned with who you authentically are and what feels really resonant for how you operate in the world. And that listening first starts within. And we talk a lot about the rise of all the in the wellness space, meditation and mindfulness.
Yeah.
This is really coming from that need of first of all, to just be still, because in that top down, we've really oriented to responding in fear and living in fight and flight, and whether we're outwardly taking action and feeling like we constantly have to be doing, to our heads spinning in thought constantly, that just there's no space to listen to our authentic needs. And so in that regenerative space where we can really just allow ourselves to be, and for a lot of people, just even practicing a stillness between thoughts.
Yeah, that's the slow right down to like a real slow pace and a slow state of being. And the FOMO, fear of missing out, we've actually, my generation was introduced to the TV. My parents were not introduced to television. And my parents were quite concerned that television would eventually start to take over my thinking. And we're, as kids going, what the frig? Like, there's no possible way. Research would suggest very strongly that that's actually through a neural entrainment, that's what happens. And now we have social media doing the same thing. And there's a huge, huge rise in mental health and lack of mental health. And it's showing up in all kinds of schisms around people conducting their lives in ways and trying to actually conduct their lives in a way that one would identify with more of a normal pace. And Society right this second, United Nations is the one who actually identified this first. By 2020, mental health will be the leading cause of disability. And here we are at 2020, and we hit this mark a couple of years ago. And it's our observation that slowing down requires a conscious effort to slow down and to go offline, to unplug, to meditate, to be mindful, to get engaged with music, the arts, creative. And it's also my observation that it's the creative class that's going to lead us into this space, or already leading us into this space. And creative class includes anybody who actually is in touch with the fact that they're creative by nature, which is absolutely everybody. But the creative class are the first to actually go over and move in that direction. Some of them who are young to that space, and some that have been in that space for a long time. That takes a huge amount of courage, because it's about flowing rather than fitting in. Creative by nature and by definition is about flow. It's not about fitting in. Fitting in is actually hierarchical, and it can be accomplished in all kinds of ways, but our society has been built on a fitting in mandate, because it was about a control and keep the masses, from the beginning, keep them safe from tigers and bears and whatever. So we'll actually, build up cities and city walls, and then eventually that just moved us to where we are today. And even architecture doesn't actually feature people-centric architecture. The architecture typically is outside-in centric. So it's centric to how does it look on the landscape and what we're experiencing outward, as opposed to coming to understand that everything that we experience and that we create has a bigger potential of realizing its big opportunity to actually pull people together when it's created with connection in mind.
Yeah.
And connection, what you're saying, Irvin Laszlo was saying, without connection, there's no evolution. And we are evolving, like we are being moved into a space where we have to evolve really, really fast. And the paradox is, to accomplish that, we believe that we need to actually go inside, which is naturally going to get us in touch with body rhythm, which tends to be more slow. If you've got a heart that's just banging away at a really fast rate, that's not a long sustained, you can't sustain that.
Right. And this is the most important part of our evolution, is it's counterintuitive, because we all have this sense of things need to change, and they need to change now fast.
Yeah.
And that change is about allowing and giving ourselves permission to be slow. And if we think about our existence on this planet, and we touch so many points, like the rise of mental health, and starting with television. Before television, how did we come together and share messages as a community? We'd gather together in some town square.
Yeah.
And we would literally all come together and gather, and we've been talking about like our strategy, which we won't share right now, but really coming back to that place. And I think so many people, with the rise of meetups and wanting to connect authentically in person with people, is so important, because we've really realized, with social media and your emails, and you got to do this and you got to have this, we literally cannot keep up. We cannot keep up with the amount of information coming at us, and all the areas that we're being pulled to exist in, and that the speed at which information is delivered to us if we think of like in your generation even, and just going back, the amount of stimulus that we encounter day to day is exponentially ridiculously high compared to, you know, pre-television.
Yeah.
And so I think that I know that a part of this evolution is to, in moving slow and letting go of all these places that we're feel this tie or responsibility to, is really coming back to simplicity and coming back to how do we want to exist in this world?
Yeah.
How do we want our architecture to reflect our ability to connect in physical presence with people?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, the rise of yin, we have this understanding of the need to nurture ourselves, nurture the people that we love, and
and I think that the piece that's really interesting, having been in business for a lot of years, and business consultant in that space specific to helping business leaders perform at a higher level and then sustain performance, getting sustained improvements as a function of either making a shift in your operations or with your people or in self, used to be something that would just allow people who are stuck to get unstuck, and then they would take off because now they were actually at a higher or lower level, deeper level of engagement. And what I've observed over the last maybe 5-10 years, that game has changed dramatically. And it's not just about getting unstuck, it's about getting unstuck, then staying unstuck. And it's our observation that those types of things in a business context that used to work are no longer going to work as we move into this space of needing to actually honor the rhythm that is flow. And business typically was a go, 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 scale as quickly as you can. And it was an external focus. So we talk about the external network effect, and what we're very invested in helping people understand is the network effect has the biggest impact when it's the internal network effect. So it's an internal network effect with self and then with other people. That's the root. First off, getting unstuck is to go move from out there to in here. And then staying unstuck is working the internal networks that we have with people. You can still use social media, you still use video, you can still use all those mechanisms, but the locus, where we actually are identified with, needs to actually be inside us. And if it's really, really low rather than high in our head, it ends up being much more slower exchange. And therefore it's more digestible and it's more compatible with us coming together, rather than the person who can talk the fastest is a person who actually ends up being at the front of the room, leading the class, be that an education format, a business format, a leadership format. But what we're moving to is everyone learning to lead themselves first, and then identifying, do I want to go on this journey with this gang? Okay, if they're identified with who I want to be and who I aspire to be, I'll go on that journey. And I think the millennials are ones that broke the mold in business, in particular, business being the easiest way to actually hold ourselves accountable, because you can see results, this works, this doesn't work. So I feel that businesses actually provides us with mirrors where in personal relationships or other relationships, we don't have that opportunity. But the millennials are the first one that came on board and said to their bosses, okay, well, tell me what you're doing, because I really believe in the planet. I really believe in opportunities. I really believe in this, and this. What's your scorecard relative to holding yourself accountable to that? Because that's really important to who I am inside. And from my perspective and my learning over this last 10 years in particular, I think millennials are onto something. And then the ones behind them, the Zetters, they're really on to something, saying the whole purpose of life is to have fun. So this has been construed as entitled. And I really, really believe that the millennials have got that right. We are entitled to this huge, big, beautiful life. The mechanics associated with that are very different from the mechanics associated with how to be successful in the past. And that's the little bit that's actually takes a little bit of learning. But the entitled piece, we're all entitled to actually live in ways that we really enjoy ourselves, travel, eat out, whatever it is that you want to do, and really fully allow yourself to be fully outrageously you. That is right on. the mechanics, the flow mechanics, or mechanics associated with flow, those are the types of things that we're very invested in helping people come to understand. And the very first thing is you have to actually slow down and move from running around trying to keep up with everybody else and fitting in and going with the flow, just to actually go inside and start to find your flow and start to identify what's your rhythm. What's your rhythm? Your rhythm just in terms of a normal way of breathing, in terms of a normal way of conversing.
Yeah. What is it that you need to identify for yourself about how you feel nurtured and how you feel supported and how you feel loved with yourself?
Yeah.
And because if we're seeking that outside of ourselves, we're giving our power away, basically.
Yeah.
You know, and when you're talking about in your previous riff about television and now social media feeding us this information, and your parents saying like that's going to program your mind.
It's going to really freak you out.
That is sort of the essence of like when touching on the mansplaining. It's like what we have to be so cognizant of what we're taking in as information, especially in this rise of misinformation, and you know the internet can portray even fake news and all of these different things. The importance in our evolutionary growth is really like that inner trust of this is my truth, and I believe and resonate with that, or I don't, and firmly rooted solidly in that, so that you're aligning to others and to whatever life it is, that entitled life that you feel you deserve and you can have, and that any sort of aspect of fitting in or taking in that information, whether it's mansplaining or whether it's through programming, is how is it serving you? How is it actually making you feel? And because in that entitlement, everything is about our feeling. If we create our reality based off of the resonance, our broadcast, we had this conversation earlier, this broadcast of what's coming from within us. Yeah. So if we don't feel supported, or we don't feel loved, or we don't feel worthy or good enough, or we have any sort of these programs wrapped and sort of keeping us compressed or constricted to expand to these ways of being outrageously ourselves, that reality, that's what keeps us stuck. And I was going to ask you, because you've worked with business for so long, what was that common factor that you saw with these businesses that kept them stuck?
The thing that keeps us all stuck is our unconsciously biased orientation to what's worked in the past. And so for an individual in a leadership role, they learn through a life experience of what worked. And usually they can see, the entrepreneurs that we work with, they can see, hear, and feel things that other people can't. They don't know how to express that. And it's something that's inside them, but they have no mechanism to be able to explain that even to themselves, let alone explaining it and bridging it to other people. So it's a big chunk of what we did is to help them first off understand what was going on inside them, so they could get a handle of why Joe over there could never understand what he's explaining, because the way Joe learns or the Joe processes, he processes in a totally different way. So the reason people get stuck is because what used to work doesn't work. What used to work for my father, what used to work for my father's father, what used to work to father's father. Like, this is the challenge we are now facing at this point in history. What used to work is going to start working less and less and less. A centralized top-down is going to start working less, and it's going to start to pass off to a bottom-up, decentralized orientation to life. We already see that with the gig economy. We see that with crypto. We see that with alt finance. We see that all over the place. And the economics in the world are such that it's shifting from top down to bottom up. Those entrepreneurs and the businesses that we pointed out, these changes, they weren't those changes, they were changes from 10 years, 20 years ago, to indicate that shift. Those are the ones that were able to get unstuck because we gave them a language that they were not aware of about how they get themselves stuck. And then once they're able to actually get themselves stuck, then the next phase is how to stay unstuck. They started to realize by bridging to other people in a way that was more relevant to the other person, that's how they stayed unstuck, which was kind of like magic. When we first introduced this, and we introduced this because my wife and business partner, Sharon Gilmore, comes from an adult education background. So she understood how people learned. And people are, as adults in particular, will not go on a journey if they cannot see themselves on what the journey entails and themselves being successful in that journey. Well, millennials have arrived telling us, I'm not going on any journey with you until I know that it's going to satisfy what it is I need, and it's actually going to hold a trajectory that's really near and dear to me. That has never taken place that I'm aware of in our history. And the education system is having a really hard time evolving to actually help students in this regard. And that's what Sharon pointed out all the time. So everything is shifting from what I would identify as a top-down to more of a bottom-up and inclusive. And sure enough, we have signs all over the place now that's client-centric, student-centric learning, client-centric learning, team-centric culture shift, leadership-centric, leadership from the inside out. That's the stuff that now is getting all kinds of legs in research. But when we started at the beginning, there was nobody. I was looking all over the place for research papers on what it is we intuitively saw, worked for clients to getting them unstuck and then staying unstuck. And it's exceedingly exciting at this point in history to hear new research coming out saying, yeah, that's how it works. You have to get inside. You have to slow down to go fast. Like all the wonderful little buzzwords that have floated around for a long time.
Yeah, but I think it's also like it's go slow to go slow. Like, what is life about? Are we in a rush? Why do we need to be in a rush, anyways? Like, it's really, for me at least, it's like a reframe of simplicity, and like, just what if life can be slow? Why do we? Or maybe some people enjoy that fast life, and that's fine as well. But I think it's also, to appreciate time. It's if you walk half as fast as you do, you can take in more. And for me, that's such a an important point. And I want to touch on as well, is I think the unstuck bit. We're talking everything about flow here. It's surrender to letting go constantly, because I think the biggest thing is the thing that keeps us stuck, at least from my experience, is anytime we're holding on to thinking that we know.
Absolutely.
We live in a world that is a mystery, and we can never know or predict with certainty, what will occur in our life. I don't remember who quoted this, but it was like, if you want to predict your future, you create it. You create it from every now moment and every vibrational frequency that you bring to your reality. And that really is a need to be present with what you're feeling, and to have that space, that space where we create. If we think of a white canvas, it's just this empty space. There's infinite possibilities, and if we can stand in that place of infinite possibilities and be okay with the unknown and have that trust that everything will be given to me in the right time, in the right flow. Like, this is where we need to go as a society. And then, of course, bridging to one another in that space of really listening and understanding that we're all connected, and it's not about me and my agenda, but it's about our collective agenda for how we're all to evolve together.
Yeah. And there's the counter up until, well, even this is in place right now, those who actually historically have controlled the agenda of society have been the big thinkers. So those who actually have moved through MBA, PhD. I happen to be a chartered accountant, certified management accountant, CPA, Bachelor of Math. Those are the people who historically have actually, society said, okay, we don't know how to figure this out. The big thinkers can go and figure this out faster than somebody else. And then that was a really great turnaround. We're going to actually promote you to the top of the heap or close to the heap. And so the whole rise of this top down is a function of also the way we actually structured the education system. And then we structured and rewarded fast thinking, fast results, duplicatable results. So the idea of a society, we've evolved to a place where we now reward this notion of top-down hierarchy. And what's happening and really freaking it up is millennials come in and say, yeah, I want all those wonderful things that the people at the top of the hierarchy have, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go through that crap, because I saw my parents go through it and they lost everything in 2008. Or they lost everything on their way through that. So I'm not going to do that. I'm actually very much entitled to that type of a life, as we all are, that's actually making sure everyone's actually rewarded and rewarded for being them. So let's actually figure this out. And again, that's the challenge we have at this point in time. The education system, the finance system, the economics, the politics, they're all those hierarchies and the infrastructures are struggling with, it's not just one person who's claiming this or two people, it's a whole generation, and it's all the generation in behind millennials are saying, yeah, we're not doing that anymore.
It's really a reflection of our true nature and how everything is grassroots. We all evolve from the earth. We rise from the earth. We are the earth. And I would even like to take the reframe of a challenge out of the picture. And it's really like a surrender to our true nature. It's that surrender. It's not about fighting the old way. It's surrender, and it's about just realizing that it was never sustainable, and it's the time. And this is, I've been referencing the Spontaneous Evolution book by Steve and our buddy.
Spontaneous is Bruce Lipton.
Bruce Lipton, thank you.
Yeah.
Bruce Lipton, because they talk about how historically evolution has always required some sort of crisis in order for us to make a big jump in evolution. And the old model of Darwinian's evolution, in that it took a long time and a series of different gene mutations to occur for any sort of evolution, is really an old thinking. And that, what if we just look at how we have evolved, even from single cells to multi-cells to becoming human, there's always been some sort of crisis in the environment that has created this almost magical transformation. So to get out of our heads that fast is the way to go, and to surrender to some sort of magic that occurs that is supporting the species evolution into completely new ways of being. And I think that I'm surrounded around different millennials that have this feeling of magic, and it really does come from this place of love and the power of love, and that power of our love to just really want to support one another. That is going to create this seemingly magical evolution that I don't think we quite understand how that's going to look yet. And it's exciting because we don't know how that's going to look, because it's up to us to define that
and create it.
And if we're creating it from a place of, this is going to be hard, we don't have enough time, there's too many challenges, those are all
we have to
fight our way through. That is the old model that will perpetuate that system. And the jump is to really surrender to, what if the answer is slow? What if the answer is all inside here? What if there's a magical unseen realm that is supporting our growth and cheering us on? And this is the vibrational frequency that I believe is so key for us to adopt.
Yeah, it's interesting as you're talking. I'm reminded, so I live in Canada, and my parents are from the north central Ontario. We used to go fishing as kids all the time, and we would fish on rivers. Some of the rivers would be really small, and some of the rivers would be really, really wide and deep. And I remember Dad explaining to us that should you get swept up in the river because you're trying to walk across rocks and that type of thing, and you get pulled into the river, the thing that you have to do is you have to, instead of fighting the river is always going to win. The flow of the river, the speed of the river, and it's very likely, if it's in deep parts, it's going to pull you down. The thing you have to do is quiet your mind and go inside and allow yourself to be pulled and then kick off the bottom in the direction of the river. And I remember telling clients, and more than a few times, that would come to see us and actually using that metaphor to get some sense of, well, I'm stuck, we're stuck, and I feel like I'm drowning. I said, okay, so here's the thing you need to do with drowning. I give them the river story, and it would help them understand that the river has swept you up because you need to move in a different direction. You're stuck, and to get unstuck, you can't use the same mechanics that you've been using. It's you don't know. It's unknown unknowns. We don't know what we know. In a river analogy, you need to surrender, and rather than fighting and thrashing, allow yourself to surrender and be pulled in whatever direction you're going to be pulled, and then kick off the bottom in the new direction, which is the difference between, in the metaphors, is going with the flow and then find your flow being the way to actually get unstuck. And that usually ends up with some kind of crisis, because we're organisms that actually fight against the idea of, hey, I'm going to drown. I'm not going to surrender to this. Well, it's a great metaphor, out there in society. I'm working in a tech company. I'm working in a creative company. Whatever it is, the pace out there is just going faster and faster and faster. And you're telling me to slow down. And we are telling you to slow down. Using the analogy of a river, that river out there is going to swallow up all forms of people and all forms of mechanisms that we used to use to succeed, because it's going faster and faster and faster. The speed at which information and energy is now being exchanged is off the charts in just the last 2 to 3 years relative to the last 10 years, relative to the last 20 or 100. It's exponential. We're drinking from the fire hose that is digital, and information plus energy is now way beyond our capacity to accommodate. And we have mental illness telling us, with flags all over the place, this old way of orienting to information plus energy and flow and the river is not working anymore. We need a new orientation. And that's what we're here to share with the world.
Just be it. Be flow.
Just be it.
Flow.
Be it flow. I think we're up for time.
Yeah, we are up for time, so that's a good ending. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next Thursday. I think we'll be back on the YouTubes.
Yeah,
right?
I think the YouTube
we'll be back
feels
on
right.
the YouTubes feels, so we'll see you then. Have a beauty flow day. That's me and